Hey, I did it again. It's been way too long since I made a video. By the way, the reason why I didn't make a video in so long is because that thing just exploded about a while ago, and now I have to get a whole new computer. And I did. You might notice that there isn't an overwhelming buzzing of a computer fan in this recording, and that's because I got one that doesn't suck. So, news story of the week. Donald Trump has rumored and has talked about the possibility of invoking a state of emergency, essentially, in order to get funding for his wall. A wall that, one, won't stem any sort of illegal immigration. If anything, it'll actually hurt it, because, I don't know if you know, but a lot of illegal migrants are actually moving back to Mexico. At least those from Mexico, but that the number one source of illegal immigration in America are overstayed visas, which walls don't do a whole lot to protect from. Good start. I'm already a minute in and I'm already getting distracted. So let's talk about emergency powers and what really dangerous circumstances that this sets up for a future relationship between Donald Trump, his role as the president, the kind of role of the presidency, and possible threats to democracy. So just as optimistic as ever. So what are the limits on presidential powers, especially when it comes to emergency powers? Can Donald Trump even invoke emergency powers in order to pass his wall money? And if he did use his emergency powers, what could he do with them? So let's take a look, because me, and I'm sure a lot more other people, are also terrified. So the thing about emergency powers is that they're not super duper well defined. It's not part of the Constitution, but it has been defined congressionally and over the years as exceptional powers that in a state of exception, i.e. an emergency, the president can do things that are extra legal or, overreaching his presidential power in order to maintain the safety of the United States. This is sort of all wrapped up under the idea that he is the executive branch and that this is the role of the executive branch in an emergency. And to be honest, the limits on the president's ability to do these things is not well defined. A lot of Supreme Court justices over the centuries have shied away from putting limits on this, and for the most part, they have been reprimanded sometimes, but usually after they already did the thing that they did. The most infamous example would probably be when FDR interred a whole bunch of Japanese Americans during World War II. But it has been used in more and more loose circumstances. For example, George Bush mobilized a bunch of members of the National Guard and reservists to fight in Iraq, using 9/11 as the source of the emergency, even though Iraq was a war that had literally nothing to do with 9/11. And also because of World War I and Woodrow Wilson, there is a precedent that the president can actually use his powers to shut down what's called wired communication, which of course meant like telegraph lines and telephones in days of like World War I, but today could probably be used to shut down or censor the internet. The president can also use emergency powers to invoke a lot of economic sanctions. Usually this is done by freezing the assets of people from rogue states in order to stop the funding of like terrorism or counterinsurgencies against the United States and such like that. But there's no actual limit to this. The president can just freeze the assets of really any American he deems a threat, including all of them. So if he wanted to completely freeze the US economy, Trump totally could in a state of emergency. Again, you can thank a whole bunch of different regimes and presidencies that have been slowly but surely increasing the scope of what the president can do in these types of situations, and it's just kind of balled out of control. Another thing that you might not know is that under an emergency powers, the president can actually use military on the ground. This was done in Katrina. It has been used in sites of natural disasters in the past. Yeah, due to the Insurrection Act of 1807, presidents can do this. The idea that military are used as police, while it is a touchy subject in American history, there's nothing outright banning it if the right circumstances are in place. And there's also a series of documents called PEDs, which are a series of emergency draft executive orders that were drawn up during the Eisenhower administration to basically get used in case of a Soviet attack. But while a lot of them have been kept secret and we don't actually know what are in these documents, there's a lot of signs that it is basically a term for wrapping up a bunch of subversives that are on a list in the FBI and basically arresting everybody. This list is, by the way, at the times that it has been sort of hinted at, over 10,000 names long, and they could also revoke passports with this. Now, this power is great, but some people have their doubts that it's limitless. For example, Representative Adam Schiff, a Democrat from California, has made the claim that Trump probably could not invoke an emergency situation in the case of forcing funding for the wall. However, most legal scholars that I have been researching say that really this is uncharted waters, and really he can do pretty much whatever he wants. Unless, like, the Supreme Court, that, by the way, is packed full of conservatives now, tell him otherwise. There was some limits put on presidential powers in an emergency that were put in 1976 after Watergate, and President Truman was stopped in a state of emergency from nationalizing the steel industry in order to keep fighting the Korean War, so maybe there is some legal way to stop Trump from just appropriating tons of funds, billions of dollars, to build a pointless vanity project. But on top of that, maybe stop further, more destructive aspects. Because here's the real scary part. The wall is a giant waste of money and will make a statement that America is really a vastly different country than it was when even a few years ago. But what this does is, if he uses the state of emergency in order to just get things he wants when democracy is being inconvenient for him, that sets a precedent. And I mean, like, dictator stuff. As of last week, the House is now in Democratic control, which means that a significant branch of the US government is under control of a party that is very opposed to Donald Trump's platform. I mean, his own party is even lukewarm to him sometimes. And if he can circumvent Congress with emergency powers, you can see this being used to not only undermine the democratic process, but even undermine elections themselves. And I don't know if you've looked at the history of Republican gerrymandering and voter suppression, but Republicans aren't terribly concerned with democracy, and so I don't see them making a moral stand on this. For example, imagine a 2020 election where Donald Trump's numbers are very, very low. The Republicans look like they're going to face a massive defeat in Congress, and that whoever's running against him for president is going to sweep the Electoral College and become the next president of the United States. Donald Trump, just like George Bush was totally able to do, can manufacture a emergency, because really the president is the only determiner of a state of emergency. It's just whether he feels there is an emergency that is warranted for invoking these powers. So let's say he says that Iran is trying to meddle with the election. Hell, maybe he can even play into the Democrats' playbook and say Russia's trying to meddle with the election. Let's just go with Iran. Iran seems like more of a Trump target. So let's say he's saying Iran is trying to hack search results on Google, that they're trying to set up violence at the polls, and they're trying to just spread propaganda in order to make sure that Donald Trump loses, because he's so close to just forcing them to become a capitalist, republic that is subservient to the United States. Just they need one more push, like they have for the last 40 years. So Donald Trump goes and announces that he's going to invoke emergency powers to protect the election from meddling. This involves censoring the internet in order to make sure that propaganda and foreign intervention is taken out, which, of course, to Trump would mean anybody who criticizes him, so only pro-Trump stories rise to the top of Google, rise to the top of Facebook. And on top of that, anybody who posts anything too against the president, who has too big a platform, could find themselves banned. On top of that, he announces that he cannot guarantee the safety of anybody who goes to vote at the polls, that he's going to have to send armed guards or military to go there, and by doing that, greatly suppressing the vote and probably stopping a lot of people from getting their voices told. Overall, through these sort of tactics, using emergency powers that at this moment are completely within his ability, Donald Trump manages to squeeze out another electoral college but not popular vote victory. This is, of course, a doomsday scenario. This is a very scary scenario. I know that there is obviously a slippery slope argument here, which is not always the strongest thing to do, but I just wanted to point out that all of the things I said are, at the moment, because a lot of this is untested in the courts, possible for the president to do if he invokes a state of emergency. And if he gets a taste for it, i.e. in this situation for building his wall, and he's facing another year and a bit of a Democratic Congress, what's to stop him from doing it again the next time he hits a brick wall? Not to mention, I told you that a lot of these things are built up on legal precedents that have been built up really ever since the founding of the United States. And if he does this, he could be setting a precedent. So even if Donald Trump loses the election, or if Donald Trump even, decides that democracy is even worth pursuing after 2024 or whatever, normalizing using a state of emergency to circumvent democracy for the power of the presidency is a huge step forward in moving American power away from Congress and elected officials and more towards the presidency, which is also elected, but it's less democratic and it's one person. Throw in the fact that a strong breeze could take out one of the last remaining liberal judges, and you could obviously see a very right-wing supermajority in the Supreme Court that could basically rubber stamp all of these things. And this is why I found this whole situation very, very terrifying. Happy 2019, friends! It's really good to be back. My computer blew up. I got super duper sick over the holiday break. And on top of that, I had a death in my family and I had to do an emergency trip to rural Saskatchewan very shortly after I got back from my trip to the United States for the holidays. And so things have been a little crazy over the last month, and now I'm happy to move forward, and I'm already excitedly working on 2 new video projects. Stay tuned, they will be coming soon. Anyways,